For the first time, developing countries installed more renewable energy than developed countries in 2015. Countries such as India, Brazil, Chile and Mexico are producing clean, sustainable energy with solar power. China is the world's largest investor in renewable energy and is a leader in the world of solar expansion. And in the United States, analysts are forecasting the solar market could soar to nearly 120% this year. We begin with this report from CCTV's Jessica Stone, who spoke with industry experts at the recent solar summit in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Just last week, the U.S. marked its 1 millionth solar panel installation. It took 40 years. Analysts say it'll only take 2 years to install another 1 million.
By 2020, we are going to be generating enough electricity to power 20 million homes here in the United States. So we are really at that inflection where solar starts to take off.
One reason solar is soaring, it's less expensive and more efficient than ever. Installing these panels in the U.S. cost 70% less than it did in 2009. Industry analysts at the Solar Summit say government incentives also play a major role.
We see the importance of government incentives in Europe, where the feed-in tariffs across the board for many countries were pulled back in the last 3 to 4 years, and that really sort of destroyed the market there to some extent.
This solar summit comes just a few weeks after more than 150 countries from around the world signed on to the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Industry analysts say that sends a powerful signal that developing countries will be relying on solar to meet their targets for years to come.
COP21 definitely comes in and says, well, if you do take the risk to go into these countries, we're giving you the confidence that there will be a framework in place, there will be a global commitment in place to support you with regulations that will help you become more competitive and have sort of de-risk you a little bit. And most importantly, that we will have financing available for you.
China is leading the world in solar expansion. It plans to triple solar energy production in the next 4 years, adding as much as 20 gigawatts every year. India is a distant number 2, but it's making solar power the cornerstone of meeting its Paris climate commitments. India also has the advantage of receiving 300 days of sunshine each year.
The Prime Minister enhanced the target from 20,000 megawatt to 100,000 megawatt, a 5-fold change in India's target.
Analysts say countries like Chile, Mexico, Thailand, and the Philippines also have higher quality sunshine than northern European nations do, which means one solar panel can produce more electricity.
Essentially, for one panel that you put in Germany, you'd get far less energy out than one panel that you would put in Chile.
But storing the power of the sun once harnessed still remains a challenge, one the industry is still working to figure out. Jessica Stone, CCTV, Scottsdale, Arizona.
Joining us now from Beijing is Wang Tao. He's the Assistant Director of the China Business New Research Institute. And here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Robert Aiello. He is an Energy Principal Specialist with the Inter-American Development Bank. And from New Delhi, we are joined by Anup Ghosh. He is the CEO and Council of Energy and Environment and Water in India. And also with us is Alex Pereira. He is the Global Director of the Electricity Initiative at World Resources Institute. Thanks so much, all four of you, to joining us. Tao, I want to start with you in Beijing. 2015 saw China become the largest solar market, surpassing Germany. Why is China investing so much in solar energy, and why is it such a good fit for China?
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. I think there are 3 reasons that China invests so much in the solar energies. First one is China's promise to the climate change and also to its own response in tackling the air pollutions. As we already seen that China promised to reach the carbon peak by 2030 or as soon as possible, and also to have 20% of the non-fossil fuel energy by 2030. That is a promise China made last year in the Paris Agreement. And in order to achieving that, the renewable energy, especially like the wind power and solar PV, is going to play a very big role. So this is the first layer of the motivation, and China wants to fill the international responsibilities. The second one is China also views these 2 industries, or renewable energy in general, the strategic, importantly, industries for its future economic development. It hopes that by promoting these industries, it will be able to give Chinese economy the advantage in the future a carbon-constrained and low-carbon economy. So China will be able to benefit from the development of these industries from these years. On the third aspect, I think China also has a little bit of the selfish consideration, because we all knew that China has the world's largest capacity of the solar PV manufacturing. China produced almost 70% or 60 to 70% of the total solar PV panels in the world. And for China itself, it's also beneficial to have the capacity to absorb this capacity of the productions, and also helps the local economies to flourish.
Yeah, build it and they will come. There's a similar target in India, isn't there, Arunabha? Really quite ambitious targets. 40% of electricity from renewables by 2030. And considering India is going to be probably the most populous country in the world by then, with over 1.4 billion people, is that achievable?
Oh, most surely we can achieve it. But let me just correct that, Nathan. The target for 2030 is 40% of electricity generation capacity from non-fossil sources. That includes renewables as well as nuclear.
And hydro as well, I suppose.
But even within renewables, we've got a massive target, as well as hydro, that's right. So we have a massive target of 175 gigawatts, or 175,000 megawatts of solar, wind, and biomass by 2022. And that basically implies that what we are trying to do in the renewable energy sector in 7 years is what took Germany about 21 years to achieve. So it's a massive target being driven by an economy at a much lower level of development. So it is really a leapfrogging to a different energy system.
Roberto, I want you to pick up on that, because 2015, the first year that developing countries are investing more into renewables like solar than the developed countries. Why is this? How has that happened?
Thanks, Nathan. Look, renewable energy development keeps largely shaped by government policy and government action. And you can see that there has been a decrease in the support policies in some countries in the developed world lately. For instance, in Europe, there's a new imposition for taxes on renewable energy generation. And there's also the expiration of the federal production tax credit in the US. On the other hand, you can see that in the developing world, there's more and more countries are adding targets and specific actions towards renewable energy development. So these two actions coupled together result in that figure that you're mentioning. But of course, this is probably biased by the inclusion of China. If you remove China out of the equation, probably this not goes in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, China does account for something like 67% of the new capacity. Alex, we've seen a lot of solar panels here in the United States go up, even here in Washington, D.C. And across, the price coming down has really helped, hasn't it? How's that happened? And of course, that helps developing countries?
Well, yeah, this is an incredible phenomenon. The cost of renewables has dropped very quickly. And consumers are taking notice. So not just the individual household consumers who are putting panels on their roofs, but the large, fast-growing sectors like IT, Facebook and Google, even manufacturers, GM, Volvo, and others are coming together to say, you know what, we demand renewable energy. We've got global targets. We want to find ways to access this more affordably. And there was a recent launch WRI was part of with a coalition of companies and NGOs called the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, which is basically the companies coming to the market saying, we want renewables, we're willing to work with our electric utilities to develop new, more innovative business models to get this.
Yeah, and India's going to host a Renewables Alliance, a Solar Alliance as well, very much targeting that. Hao, I want to just bring you in again, because it's all very well to say China is going to triple its solar capacity by 2020, but at the same time, China is still the largest emitter of coal. Is this a race between the sun and the earth in terms of who wins out in terms of energy? Can renewable energy actually get to a place where it can make a significant difference in China, especially when it comes to air quality?
That's a great question, Nathan. I think we all recognize that in China and in the foreseeable future, coal still will be the dominant player of the energy mix, because end of the day, even today, coal still accounts for about over 60% of China's total energy demand. And there is already a huge targets being set by Chinese government, and the ambition for renewables such as solar PV and wind are dramatic. I think, as you just mentioned, solar PV capacity is going to triple in a few years' time, and also China is going to double its already were the #1 wind capacity, wind power capacity by 2020. So this is a huge improvement and increase of the scales in the renewable energy. But if you will think about what is the scale of the electricity generated from, for example, coal and hydro and other sources, they are not so big. Today, China generates about over 70% of the electricity from the coal. So that is the major source of the air pollution in China, the consumption of coal and also the coal-generated power. But the other 20% is coming from hydro, which is so far the largest source of the non-fossil fuel. But that has been built for many decades, and limited by the capacity, there is limited room for China to increase that. And despite all this increase, recently very dramatic increase in China in the wind and solar PV, wind only accounts for about 3%, and solar is only 0.5%. So they are going to grow and much quicker and also have a bigger role to play. But I think it also takes time for them to play a very big role in China's electricity demand.
Let's go to New Delhi.
Exactly.
Arun Nabha, what challenges, of course, does India face? China seems very, very optimistic about meeting its targets on time, if not earlier. There's always a hint in there. Is India going to be on the same level?
Yeah, I think so, because I think the drive towards a cleaner energy future has been driven by a number of different factors. Number one is policy. Even within the fossil fuel side, we now have a provision that from 2017, every new coal power plant is going to be what is called ultra supercritical or more advanced. Means the efficiency level of the next coal power plant that comes on is going to be at least 30 to 40% cleaner than anything else that exists so far. The second thing is that we see a much larger rollout of renewables happening in India much sooner than it occurred in China. So China built out about 1,000 gigawatts of coal before the renewables revolution began there. In India, the renewables revolution is happening when the entire electricity capacity is just about 280 gigawatts. Against that, we are trying to build out 175 gigawatts of solar and wind and biomass. So the rollout of renewables is happening at a much earlier stage. And the third big factor is, I think, the way the businesses are evolving. We've got a very clear mechanism of what is called reverse auctioning, which and every tender that is put out, there is a lowering of the prices. So this is not extra government money going in. It's actually the businesses coming and competing with each other to drive the prices lower. So I think these factors are going to make sure that we do achieve the targets we're setting.
That's an interesting point. Roberto, Latin America has long been a sort of fossil fuel paradise, if you like, in terms of both what it has on the ground and what it's used. What's bringing about the change in Latin America?
Well, Nathan, yeah, that's true, but there's also a very high interest in renewables. Latin America is meeting about 60% of its electricity demand on average from renewables. That includes hydropower, nuclear, of course. If you remove not nuclear, includes hydropower. Okay. But if you remove hydro, then we also expect that there's going to be an increase, as we are seeing in recent years, in other non-conventional renewable sources. And this is mainly driven by high electricity prices across most countries in the region, growing demand, and there is a rising awareness within governments and planning agencies that there is a need for diversifying energy supply, meaning energy security. Latin America, exactly.
Alex, before we go to Ray, I want a big question from you. Okay, we saw from NASA and other agencies that 2015 was the hottest year on record. Can solar and other renewables make the switch quickly enough so that we meet the targets that were set at the Paris Climate Conference, or do you think we're still lagging behind, despite all the efforts that we've just been talking about?
Well, look, we're very good at under-predicting the potential for renewables. IEA comes out with their statements of projections for renewables, and every year they're wrong. They under-predict. So I think that there are some real convergences between the business case of renewables and the awareness that there's some side effects of the fossil fuel. We talked about pollution, we talked about water impacts, energy security issues. And so as countries look to develop, they're increasingly looking to renewables, not because they're members of the Sierra Club, but because they see this to be the economic development path that's best for their people.
Sierra Club, of course, a big environmental group here in the United States, and a healthy dose of American optimism to take us to the break.